We have someone who hasn't called into the show for a while, but I recognize the name because the topic is something that he would want to talk about. It's Chase calling in from the United States. Chase, welcome back to Truth Wanted.
Yo, what's happening, my friends? How we doing?
Doing good, Chase. I can't remember the last time you've called. It's been a long time, but I'm glad you're calling in today. And of course, you're talking about issues related to animal rights, which I think is on brand for you, Chase. I love that. What do you want to talk to us about today specifically?
Well, to be clear, I do care about humans also, but yeah, I talk about the animals quite a bit, huh? Okay, so I was hoping that I think it might be fun if we did some street epistemology on me about a claim I have that people should deconstruct speciesism.
Absolutely. I want to see Adam talk to you about this if Adam is up for it. Adam, you want to talk to Chase about speciesism?
Oh, I am down to clown.
All right.
All right. Yeah. So can you give maybe just a 2 or 3 sentence summary of speciesism and what that means to you?
Yeah. So speciesism is like discrimination against other beings just because they're not human.
All right, so discrimination against other beings because they're not human. What are some examples of this discrimination? Can you list off a couple?
Sure. If we were to, kick a dog and say, oh, well, it don't matter, it's just a dog, well, that would be speciesism because dogs don't want to be kicked any more than you and me. If we were to say it's okay to slaughter a cow or a pig or a chicken just because we enjoy their flesh taste or it's convenient for us, that would be speciesism because we surely wouldn't do that to an innocent human. Or, so usually it applies to animals, but it could also apply to a species of aliens. For example, if we were to find aliens that exist on another planet, or if they were to come here or something, and we were to discriminate against those beings just because they're not human, that would also be a form of speciesism.
Okay. So you're saying performing an act of violence on a member of another species just because they're a member of another species or despite, our cravings or whatever, that this is a form of speciesism. This is discrimination. Am I tracking you so far?
Yes. And to be clear, it would also be speciesism if another form of aliens were to discriminate against humans just because the humans were not born alien.
Right. So speciesism can cross all kinds of species boundaries. It's not just humans and others, but it's non-human species and non-human species, right?
Yeah. I saw that movie. It's called District 9. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what I want to drill down to then is this a general principle for all species, or are there aspects? Let me ask it this way, because when you say doing something to a member of another species just because they're a member of another species, I want to give a scenario to you. If you are starving somewhere, you're out in the woods, out starving, you're going to perish, and you've got a tasty-looking squirrel over there, would it be an example of speciesism to eat that squirrel to survive?
I think so, but it might be understandable that you had to do it. Your survival was at stake, and I might do the same to a human if I had to in order to survive.
That's an interesting point. So it's like speciesism becomes somewhat justified in certain situations of duress, right?
I'm not sure if I'd say justified, but understandable. I would still consider it immoral to kill the squirrel to stay alive, but it would also be immoral for me to let myself die, because I'm an activist for human rights and animal rights and the environment. So I do a lot of good with my life. So to let myself perish would be, immoral to myself.
Okay. All right. So yeah, there's.
I would value my own life and the good that I can do more so than I would value the life of the squirrel.
Okay, so your moral position on this comes down to sort of would you say, maximal harm reduction?
Well, it's a few things. It's about maximizing well-being and the preservation of life, and minimizing needless suffering and death, and rights violations and exploitation. Trying to get rid of that as much as we can in this world, but we can't be perfect.
All right. I guess this is where I would ask you about like convenience, because like we talked about the extreme situation where we're starving in the middle of the woods. What about like convenience, where say certain food staples aren't available, or they would be available if we did some work on it, but it's just a lot easier to do this. Is this just sort of like a greater form or a less understandable form of speciesism, like you said?
Yeah, like if you can go vegan, you should go vegan, because the animals don't deserve this needless violence. And so it's just that case of like, I understand that it's a little bit harder to be vegan in this non-vegan world that we live in, but it's not that hard. We can do it, like most of us, at least in most parts of the world, certainly in the U.S., most of us, unless you're like homeless or something like that. But even that, I've fought for 2 years and was living in a vegan. But that was in California, where it was significantly easier and stuff like that. Not everybody has a car when they're living on the streets. So I just think that because it's harder for some people who want to go vegan, but they can't go vegan because they don't have access or they don't have enough money or whatever, even though a vegan diet is usually cheaper. Like we gotta, those of us who can go vegan should go vegan, because then it makes it easier for other people to have access to those foods, because it affects the supply and demand chain, puts more vegan products on the shelves, makes them more accessible.
Okay, so the phrase you used earlier, you said like maximizing wellness, right? Is that correct?
Maximizing well-being.
Maximizing well-being. Okay, so if we're maximizing well-being, are there dietary requirements for some species that where if they stopped performing these acts of speciesism, that they would become less well, say whether it's protein intake or iron deficiency or anything like that? Would there be an increase in wellness? Would speciesism cause an increase in wellness?
Well, so take a lion, for example. A lion, like, usually, I don't think a non-moral agent can be a speciesist, because they can't understand concepts of morality and rationality to the degree that we can. Like the mind of a lion is similar to the mind of a child. They just don't know any better. And a lion is a carnivore, and they're in a survival situation where they have to eat animals in order to survive. But we, on the other hand, are civilized humans who can make compassionate choices at the grocery store, and so we're held to a higher moral standard, I think.
Okay, and so yeah, it seems like it keeps coming down to sort of like that maximal wellness. So it sounds to me like your position is a sort of like an ought claim, that if it would increase your well-being, you should, or you ought to, not engage in speciesism if doing such would increase your well-being. But if your well-being would be served by performing acts of speciesism, that's understandable.
Pretty much, yeah. Like I think I just look at it like a trait equalized human, a human who has the same intelligence level and lifespan of a dog or a pig. We still give them respect, and we don't, treat them with violence if we don't have to, because they value their existence, they value their lives and how they're treated, and I see no difference between these animals and a human who is of the same intelligence level. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
It does. It does. I would also, I want to see how far you take this by like using an example. So, do you live with anyone?
Yeah.
Do you live with a female?
I live with my parents right now. Yeah, I'm taking care of my parents, and they're taking care of me. It's a nice
Males and females. Okay. It would have been better for me to just ask, is anyone you live with afraid of spiders?
My mom's probably afraid of spiders a little bit.
Okay. So in this scenario, in this hypothetical, you are in a room with your mother. She spots a spider, terrifies her. What do you do?
Well, one option is to just, catch and release the spider outside, but then I also have concerns like that's what's best interest of the spider, that's what would be the nice thing to do for the spider. But a spider is also a predator, and they're going to go outside and kill a bunch of other animals, so maybe the best thing to do is just kill the spider so that less harm is done.
Interesting. What if the best interest of the spider is to continue to live in your house?
If I'm dealing with an infestation or something, I oftentimes I try to catch and release the bugs, but I had to kill a bunch of bed bugs because they were crawling on me and eating me alive while I was sleeping, and that's not cool. I got to get my rest, So,
all right.
Got to do what you got to do, but I would do the same thing if a human came into my house in the middle of the night and was crawling on me while I was trying to sleep. There was no talking to him, no ability to reason with them. I'd resort to violence.
Okay, and then so you used infestation as an example. It's like, okay, wow, there's going to be some harm done to my family here if I let this infestation continue. Is that what you were saying? Am I correct?
Yeah, pretty much. But cows and pigs and chickens are not infesting our homes. They're non-violent beings that are just minding their own business. So I think we should put down the knife. Okay,
and here I'm really just trying to test the boundaries and limits of your devotion to this ought claim, right? So if we don't go all the way to infestation, let's just say it's just one wee little spider. He's up in the corner. He's not hurting anybody. He's freaking out your mom. Do you let him stay there? Do you relocate him to another area in your house? Do you?
I mean, typically I catch and release, but I'm really concerned about the victims of the spider also, because there's going to be multiple victims. And I am more concerned about the cows and the pigs and the chickens that aren't hurting us, as opposed to bugs that are crawling on us inside our house or even just up in the corner in our house, especially predatory animals that will harm other beings. So I value a deer more than a lion, for example.
Interesting. You value a deer more than a lion, and you said because of a lion can do more damage to more things than a deer, right?
Yeah, same reason that I value an innocent child more than I value a school shooter.
Fair. Okay, so when you make a distinction between, say, bugs, and I'm going to say harmless bugs, and when I say harmless, I mean harmless to humans, or let's say maybe a leaf-eating bug. And this might be where we kind of try to find another distinction. Do you consider plants in this speciesism view?
No, because they're not. Plants are not sentient. They're not conscious. They don't have a brain or central nervous system capable of giving them a subjective experience.
Subjective experience is the distinction for you. Okay. So you would not consider, say, me knocking down a tree to be an example of speciesism, even though that tree is a different species than I am?
Correct.
Okay. So it's the central nervous system. Interesting.
Yeah, because as I said at the onset, it's about other beings, how we treat other beings, and I don't think a tree is another being because it's not sentient. It's just a living organism.
Okay, now I have to ask you about sentience. Now, now we've entered into a whole other area of this. Dan, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Chase, you've called into the show before, so you know my thoughts on this. We're in agreement about a lot of things, Chase. And I have to thank callers like yourself for challenging me about my own principles about this, because I wouldn't be a vegan today if it wasn't for people challenging me on some of these principles. This idea of speciesism is, it's utilized in vegan communities, and I think there's merits to this idea, and I mostly agree with the concept. I think Adam's talking about some of these challenges that I think would trouble people. The plant thing comes up a lot, right? And I'm with you, Chase, because it's like, well, we don't have evidence that a plant has any kind of sentience or mechanism for sentience. They don't have the same systems like nervous systems or systems of nociception, right? Systems of where they can feel pain, because there's no central thing going on. It seems to be an organism that exists without consciousness. So it's kind of like you would treat an embryo. It's most of us on the left are okay with abortions in that same sense, and that gets arguably is that gets into some other territory there. But yeah, sentientism kind of overrides, and I think is a better idea for me to talk about than speciesism, and we're kind of hitting on that, because like sentientism, I think people can get more on board with, even though the idea of sentience is a controversial idea. It makes more sense, and I think is more intuitive to people than speciesism. Because to me, speciesism, I think, while it does make sense, you get into these things of like, well, what about the bugs, right? What about the spiders in your house and stuff, right? And those are, valid points, because if you're truly against speciesism, then you're actually going to, hold all life at equal value. And I don't think vegans do that. I think we still do have these hierarchies. They may be diminished hierarchies compared to the average person that eats meat, but I think those hierarchies still exist, and I think it's fair to acknowledge them. Anyway, that's my opinions there. Chase, what do you think?
Well, I mean, like, a puppy. Okay, so let's talk about a burning building, and we only have time to save one individual that's in the building. It's either a puppy or Hitler. I'm going to save the puppy over Hitler, right? Because it doesn't matter what species they are. Hitler's damage, and the puppy's not.
Chase, if I saw Hitler in a burning building, I'd be having a lot of questions. But yeah, I guess I probably do the same thing. I think most people, when they use that analogy, they usually use like an infant, right? Like a human infant. What do you think about that scenario where it's like a puppy versus a human infant?
Yeah, that's tricky, because the human infant is innocent and will have a longer lifespan than the puppy, and a more qualitative experience, with more sentience level, I think. And the baby might grow up to be a good human that helps the world in a lot of ways that the puppy couldn't, because the puppy's not as smart. However, this baby might grow up to be your next serial killer or child abuser or whatever. So, we don't really know. But whereas we know more with the puppy, what the puppy's going to do. But also, like a lot, like the child could grow up to be a meat eater, but then become a vegan later, and like stand up for animal rights and human rights and do all this stuff. And we don't know, like I used to be a non-vegan. I used to make fun of vegans, and now look at me, right? So people can change, right? But it's a tough call. I'd probably go with the baby.
Yeah, and I would too. And I think every vegan that I know would, because on some level, we still have an affinity towards other humans. And so we still have, and we recognize that value. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But, I'm with you though, Chase, because it's like the speciesism is trying to address this problem that we have where we treat other animal species differently. We kind of put some animals in like a food category that for the most part is kind of arbitrary, and in fact does differ culturally around the world, what some consider food and what some consider sacred. Hinduism is a great example of that, right? Cows are not to be messed with there, and we eat them every day in the United States. Dogs, Southeast Asian nations don't have as much of a problem with that, and they will raise them for food, and that's something that disgusts a lot of Americans. But if you truly don't have a care for animals, then why would you care, right? So it's something to explore. What were you going to say, Chase?
Well, there are a lot of Asian activists, for animal rights who are living in Asia that are fighting against the dog and cat meat trade and rescuing those animals from slaughterhouses. And I think most of the population there does not eat dogs and cats. But like, we might as well be eating dogs and cats if we're going to eat other animals, because there's no legitimate difference between a dog and a pig. They both value their lives and they feel pain and pleasure. They have friends and families that they care about and they don't want to die. So like, there is no burning building right now. That's the thing. Like, actually, we're forcing animals into a burning building, the slaughterhouse. We're poking and prodding them into there, and they don't want to go there. It's not fair.
I'm with you on that. Let's stick with as we're wrapping this up, let's stick to this idea that you brought to the table, though, which is this idea of speciesism. Are you still confident that this idea of speciesism holds water? Or do you think Adam's questions maybe shifted how you think about it a little bit?
No, I'm still at, I would have started and ended at a 99% confidence level that speciesism, that people should deconstruct speciesism, because nobody gets to control how they're born, and there's nothing wrong with being different. And so if we're against racism and sexism, we should also be against speciesism and ableism and everything else attached to it.
All right, Chase. Thanks so much for answering, man. I will let you go today, but I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope I get to hear from you a different time, man. Have a good one. And there you go. That was Chase. What did you think of that, Adam?
That was fun. I found it interesting that we explored the boundaries of the speciesism itself. It seemed to me like the ought itself rested more on the sentience aspect than the species aspect. But his initial claim saying people should deconstruct speciesism, that deconstruction of speciesism led us to the sentience question. And anytime the question is, and I'm going to take off my street epistemology hat, of course, anytime the question is, should we deconstruct these thoughts? I'm going to just say yes, no matter what the thoughts are, because, truth is going to withstand scrutiny.
Yeah. Or so we hope,
Or so we hope.
Yeah.
That's my optimism kicking in, I guess.
Absolutely. And I have that optimism as well, even though I may not have a free choice in optimism. It's, it's still there.
Yeah. When it comes to the burning building thing, as a philosophical thought experiment, it's fun. And we can sit there and go, the puppy is less likely to commit a genocide. So
that's true.
We can introduce
what if that puppy grows up to be Hitler's dog, though? And so then
Hitler's dog was a good boy.